Canada swans?
I saw Canada goose.
A Canada goose. What are those down there? There. Pigeons?
Hello and welcome to the Terra Nutra video series. This is our second video. We're going to talk about our values, how we chose them, why we chose them, what they are, and how we live them.
So how did we come up with these values? Well, we began looking at what Terra Nutra really stands for, what it really meant to create an organisation that could have this type of impact in the world, and really looking for 3 words which symbolises the way that we do things, in terms of both for our customers but also of ourselves as well. It's very important to live those values and to continue working towards them in order to make sure that we are on the same path as we set off with. So once we sort of looked over a number of different words that symbolized different meanings to ourselves, we came up with the top 3. I think we started off with about 12, and there were so many different sort of connotations and similarities between each of them that it did take us quite a while to actually sort of narrow it down. But once we had our values, we really looked deeper into our everyday behaviours about how we could put them into action. So essentially, what do these values mean for us? And more importantly, how can we make them become part of everything that we do?
So what are our values? Our values are authenticity, simplicity, and optimism.
Authenticity is one of our first values. When we think of authenticity, we think about being honest. We think of being trustworthy, of being able to show our true selves. It's being willing to talk even when it feels hard to do so. It is being able to make mistakes while also owning up to them. These behaviours are central to working well as a team. It's not always easy, but sharing our thoughts with one another and openly discussing matters we care about brings us closer together. It strengthens our team relationships and makes working with one another not only easy, but also happy. Trust is at the heart of building relationships. Relationships between co-workers, friends, and between an organisation and their customers. Trust is also a key part of authenticity. Without authenticity, it is much harder to have trust that we do what we say and we say what we do. Being clear and being honest is integral to building these relationships, not just within the team, but with our customers. Some of the ways in which we'll be practicing authenticity is by making sure that we stay aligned with our true values and in all of our decision makings, taking responsibility for representing these values in our communications, representing and sharing information accurately and openly as feasibly possible, and making sure that we do the right thing and not just the easy thing. We hope that by practicing these behaviours, we can make Terra Nutra a company that you can trust.
Simplicity is one of our company values. I think it's a great value. I think simplicity is a great thing. I think when things are simple, people understand them. They are not put off by them. They're engaged by them. I was trying to think of what the reverse of put off is. But when something is explained to you, as something is put to you in a simple way, I think instinctively, intuitively, people lean into those things. When those things are complex, as they often are, but if they're explained in a complex way or they are presented in a complex way, a lot of people will shy away from that thing, whatever it is, because first of all, on the face of it, they don't understand it, and naturally we pull back from things that we don't understand. And secondly, even if you want to understand it, do you have the time? Do you have the mental space to spend that time trying to understand something and trying to figure that out? And so often I think people will move on from something if they're not able to grasp it quickly. I think that's a, you know, it's a facet of the world that we live in now, with you know, our attention spans, you know, being competed over by social media and things to watch on television and the news and so forth. So really, if you want somebody to engage with a concept, you have to be able to explain it in a simple way. There's an argument as well that if you can't, then you don't really understand it yourself, which I think is really interesting. I'm not sure that I would go that far, but I think there's a lot to be said for that. So those are all reasons why we chose simplicity as a company value. I think they're all quite generic reasons relating to the virtue of simplicity in itself. I think specific to Terra Nutra, when I started looking at sustainability and carbon emissions and climate change more closely, being somebody who's not from a scientific background and is also deeply unscientific, I found a lot of the concepts and a lot of the terminology quite difficult to engage with. I didn't find it simple, and I was somebody who deeply wanted to understand and deeply wanted to engage, and so I had to kind of force myself to look beyond that complexity. I think that a lot of the vocabulary, a lot of the terminology is very, you know, is scientific because it comes from science, and so that makes sense. But there needs to be a bridge between the science and between you know, people, you know, out in the street, people like me who you know, come across these concepts, and, you know, can we present them in that way that makes them more easily and intuitively understood. And so again, I looked at all of this and thought, well, that's not simple. I think that's quite complicated. I think the language is complicated. Some of it's sort of quite strange as well. I mean, have you ever tried to imagine what a ton of carbon dioxide equivalent looks like? I mean, just put that picture in your head. I have a picture of a sort of a shipping container with huge metal shipping containers with nothing in it, because, you know, it's a gas, and so, or it's gases, and so what and how does that weigh a ton, by the way? And so you've got all of these strange concepts that actually, if you stop and really think about them, just don't seem to make any sense. And again, I really, you know, I think we were worried and remain worried that if, you know, if that's how you look at it, you go, well, there's just this, I don't get this, and so I'm going to move on to something else, or I'm going to withdraw. We can't really afford that. We need people to lean in and people to engage with climate change, with carbon emissions, with their carbon footprint. Footprint, I think, is great. Footprint is a simple concept that everybody understands, and so, you know, there's that sense of impact and leaving a shape, leaving a trace. We all have, well, most of us have feet. So if we can kind of, you know, make that bridge between the science and into kind of simple concepts that people understand, then I think that people will engage much more readily with whether it's, you know, awareness of their carbon emissions, reduction of their carbon emissions, or offsetting. Offsetting is really interesting. I think the way that we've approached offsetting is quite unique. In most instances, when you look at the process of offsetting something, you're asked to put in a load of inputs, a load of variables. Some of those you may know, you may have in your memory. Others require you to go and look in, you know, bits of paper, in bills, and, you know, look up onto the internet. And again, there's that sense of it being a complicated process, and the more steps a process has, the more complicated it is, and also the less likely people are to complete it. Unfortunately, they kind of drop out. They go off to step 2, step 3. I don't have that piece of information. I don't really understand why you're asking for it, and so I'm not going to do this. And that person may never come back again. And so we take the view that with offsetting, we would try and do all of that work for you, for the consumer, and we would package things around you know, very, very simple concepts like Christmas, or a flight, or your average annual footprint. So no calculation needed, no inputs needed. We'll do the science in the background. We'll use the industry standards. We'll use the data available from government bodies and so forth. But we'll do all of that for you, and we'll package it in a way that you just have to say, yes, I did that, or it was that kind of a thing, so I know that it's that offset done, and it's really, really quick, and it's really, really simple. And that was a very deliberate way or process for us, because we wanted people to be able to engage very easily. We wanted people to be able to intuitively grasp what these concepts were. So I think for us, simplicity is something that we want to show in everything that we do. So whether that's the way that we package our offsets, that's whether the way we write our blogs, it's the way that we talk, we try and make it as simple and as clear and concise as possible. And that is, I don't want to sound immodest, that is quite difficult, but the reward that you get for doing it is huge, because all of a sudden you see people understanding and you see people engaging, and that obviously is what we want. And so that means that that choosing simplicity and trying to be trying to live that value really works.
Our third value is optimism. So we chose optimism because we know that it's very easy to get overwhelmed when you work in the world we work in, eco, sustainability, whatever you want to call it. And we have been really inspired by Christiana Figueres and Tom Rivett-Carnac, who really were instrumental in getting the climate change agreement signed in Paris 2015. And they talk about stubborn optimism. You've got to be determinedly optimistic. And they take this really seriously, and they have a podcast called Outrage and Optimism. And they talk about the fact that you need enough outrage to be activist, but enough optimism to think that you can change the world, literally. So we have absolutely taken this to our hearts, and we practice it in our kind of daily workings. So much so that we have a phrase of drains and radiators. So if somebody's being a bit too pessimistic or drainy, we tell them they have to turn their radiator on. And if it all gets a bit much, we know that we need to take a break and go and walk in nature and be a bit more mindful. And we practice gratitude as part of our optimism. We're all really lucky to be where we are, working in a field that we absolutely love. So optimism is something that we have to kind of practice what we preach, and remind ourselves that we can do stuff, and like I said, we can change the world.
Following our value of authenticity requires us to really understand what our feelings and our emotions, and to be able to explore those and express them in ways which are understandable by others, and that can be recognized as a true emotion to the way that we're feeling. Now, authenticity in the world of climate change is really, really important. Obviously, for the last sort of 20, 30 years, the scientists have been fighting for this cause. And actually, a lot of the time, they've been just pushed to one side in terms of their claims and, the rhetoric of the issues that we face as a world. And I think that the way that we live that in Terra Nutra is that we recognise the fact that misinformation can be such a detriment to our approach to climate change, or our global opportunity to fight climate change. And you see it in the news, in the media, etc., that there is fake news out there. So being authentic in our communications, being authentic within the statements that we make, and really backing those up is so important to our sort of values and what we want to achieve out of Terra Nutra.
So can I think of an example where we've lived the value of simplicity? So how do we live our values? I think I touched on this a bit earlier when I talked about the way that we kind of approached everything that we do that is customer facing, that's sort of public facing. So whether that's our blog posts or our podcasts or the way that we package our offset products, I think all of those are examples of how we live that value, because we are trying to make them simple. We're trying to create a sense of simplicity in those in that content, in those products, and I think that's probably the best example. Certainly when I'm writing certainly when I'm writing content for the website, but also maybe when I'm writing emails as well that are talking about what we do. I'm always very conscious to try and keep the language as simple as possible and to be very, very clear. I think, I don't know if this is the right point to do a rant about emails, but I think we all receive a lot of emails, and it's very often the case that, you know, you're reading one and you're not actually sure what it is that the person is trying to say. And I think again that's where the value and virtue of simplicity comes into its own. So I think certainly the best example of us living our that particular value is in the content that we create, whether it's blog posts or emails or videos, or and also the products that we create and how we describe them. So the way that we package our offset products, the way that we package some of our consulting work. So I think that's probably the best example of that.
So what's an example of having lived optimistically? Well, Luke and I ran a marketing campaign from Mothering Sunday to Earth Day in March through to April, which was this year the deepest of lockdowns for COVID-19. And we were on the phone pushing and promoting and talking to people and trying to do this in a world that had stopped and fallen off a cliff. And I look back and think, I can't believe we just kept on going. So I know that we can be optimistic in the face of a global pandemic. And if you can't be optimistic in the face of a global pandemic, when can you be optimistic?